Hello, everyone. It's Bactrian, and today we are discussing the NDP. Um, you know, we have our election going on right now in Canada, and a lot of talk has been about Mark Carney and Poilievre for obvious reasons. They're the two front runners. But of course, traditionally, there have been three main parties in the Canadian electoral system. There's been the Liberals and Conservatives, and then the NDP in modern Canadian elections. So, how are the NDP faring in the current election? Well, pretty damn terribly. It has to be said. So right about now, the NDP are polling at about 7-9%. I mean, like it's seven in the average. They're hitting that number again and again and again in these rolling polls, and in earlier polls that have come out just before in the pre-election period, like Leger, they were at 6%. Right, so they're right at about 7% in the polls. To put that in perspective, up until this point, the NDP was hovering at around 20% in the polls. In the 2021 federal election, the NDP got 17%. The NDP has not gotten 7% of the vote since 1993, which was their worst election result ever, in which they didn't even achieve official party status. That is how bad the situation currently is for the NDP. It's a nightmare, basically. There's no way around it. So, with all that said, what exactly can they do in this election? What are their goals? What is Jagmeet Singh and the NDP? What are their goals in this election? It is essentially to survive, right? They really can't set their expectation any higher than that. Obviously, the main story this election is this titanic battle between Mark Carney and the Conservatives. One that, for now at least, Mark Carney is very clearly decisively leading, right? The federal Liberals are up overwhelmingly in the polls right now, win quite a large, perhaps a fairly large majority. At minimum, are quite likely to win a majority if the election were right now. It's not right now. We still have some time to go, but as it stands right now, they're doing very well. The NDP, meanwhile, is projected to get 6 seats currently if these results were to hold. They wouldn't get any seats in Manitoba, which has traditionally been a stronghold for the NDP. It would be a total disaster for them, essentially. They would collapse. In their worst election ever in 1993, they got 9 seats. So if they actually got 6 seats, that would be their worst result ever. And this was in a smaller parliament, too, so it would be even worse than it seems, right? So the stakes really couldn't be higher for them, because the NDP's overall, like, their biggest problem, frankly, in my opinion, is that, and I think plenty of people agree with me on this, is that they're way too ideologically similar to the Liberals. I mean, there's a reason why they were able to be in a confidence and supply agreement with the Liberals and Trudeau for a couple of years there. You'll notice they never were in a similar arrangement at any other point in their history, and their predecessor party, the CCF, never was either. In part because, although this started to become less and less true over time, they had real ideological differences with the Liberals. They were more left-wing than the Liberals. They had a more statist economic policy than the Liberals. Now, they don't, right? So what is the point of this thing, exactly? And especially in a crisis moment like this, where you have the Trump trade war going on and all of that, right? People don't really have time for the NDP. They kind of view them as a kind of embarrassing distraction, frankly. And it's hard to disagree with that assessment. I mean, they really have not set their ambitions particularly high. They've not made any themselves known in any real way. They refuse to call an election or join in an election call when they broke the confidence and supply agreement with the Liberals earlier, which would have been their best moment to call an election. So they're quite shambolic currently. However, I will say there is a tiny little silver lining for the NDP that could perhaps make this less bad than it seems. And that is the successfully implemented strategy in the 2025 Ontario election, which just happened. And that is essentially a strategy where, sure, you dump in the polls, you lose a lot of support, you lose a lot of ground, you lose a lot of traction, but you spend your entire budget, your entire campaign apparatus on ruthlessly defending your incumbents. And the Ontario NDP did this to great effect. I mean, despite losing 5% of the vote, they only lost a single seat, right? And remained the second largest party in the parliament, despite, coming 10 points behind the Liberals in the popular vote, and more than 20 points behind the Conservatives. So, and clearly, I think there's elements of this where they're trying to emulate the strategy. Jagmeet Singh, his primary, pretty much the only places he's been visiting are places where there are NDP incumbents. His first visit on the campaign trail was to Parkdale, where there's an NDP incumbent on the provincial and federal levels. So he's very clearly trying to emulate that strategy. And it's pretty much the only card he's got left to play, right? Because if the NDP does replicate this similar result to the 1990s, sorry, it's over here, it's quite hard to see them coming back from that. Like, even in this circumstance, because you might say, oh, well, they did in the 90s. Well, it was a little different then, right? I mean, like, the Conservative Party, for example, didn't exist. Like, it literally was broken. That was 1993 was probably the craziest election in Canadian history. The Conservative Party died. It ended. It was a very different time. And the NDP, while it had started to drift towards the center, for example, over the course of from the 70s on, basically, it was, it still had enough differences to kind of distinguish themselves from the Chrétien Liberals, right? Now, I don't see the argument for it continuing to exist as a party. I mean, among other things, they've got no obvious successor to Jagmeet Singh. Like, what is their bench exactly? I can't think of anything. I mean, Charlie Angus is retired as an NP. They've got Nikki Ashton, I guess, if she even wins her seat. And even then, I mean, these are not like the strongest candidates to lead the party. It's just very hard to see where they go from here, right? So what I would say, though, if they want to have any chance to even hold on, they've got to run pretty much a perfect campaign of just defending their incumbents. And it'll remain to be seen whether or not they can do that. Yeah. So that's pretty much all I have to say on that subject, to be honest. It's pretty dismal for the NDP, more or less. But perhaps the scope to which it's so bad for them was not entirely clear. But it would be monumentally bad if these results held to the end of the election. So that was pretty much all for me today. I hope you enjoyed that. I'm going to be making more videos about the election and, politics in general, all sorts of stuff. So if you want to like and subscribe, do all the YouTube stuff, feel free. And I hope you enjoyed that. Have a good day.